James Anderson strode through John F. Kennedy International Airport with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime getting exactly what he wanted. Dressed in a tailored suit that fit him perfectly, a gleaming watch adorned his wrist, and a designer carry-on bag followed him smoothly. He had earned his reputation among New York's financial elite, a king among Wall Street brokers. For James, flying first class was not merely a luxury, it was an expectation he had cultivated after decades of hard work. As he approached his designated row on the plane, a flicker of irritation surged through him. Someone had already taken the seat beside him, an unexpected sight that disrupted the exclusive atmosphere he was accustomed to. A woman, African-American in her early 40s, sat confidently with an iPad in her hands, her focus seemingly locked on something far more significant than the flight itself. Her elegant yet simple outfit, consisting of a tailored blazer and pants, conveyed professionalism, but what unsettled James was her undeniable air of authority. To him, first class was reserved for those who understood its unspoken rules, and her indifference towards his presence felt like a personal affront. As he settled into his seat, James made a point to place his briefcase between them, creating an invisible barrier. He exhaled quietly, irritated that this woman had already disrupted his evening before it had even begun. When the flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, approached with a tray of champagne, James accepted a glass, casting a glance at his seatmate. She declined without even looking up, further sharpening his annoyance. In that moment he decided to confront her. "Excuse me," he began, ensuring his tone was smooth yet authoritative. "Are you certain this is your assigned seat?" The woman, finally meeting his gaze, responded with a steady stare that made him momentarily uneasy. "Yes," was her only reply, no further explanation, just a single resolute word. James blinked, expecting at least a hint of politeness in return, but she simply returned her focus to her iPad as if he were inconsequential. The irritation within him simmered. James took a sip of his champagne, allowing the crisp taste to wash over his tongue, contemplating his next move. The woman beside him, whom he learned was named Lisa, remained completely absorbed in her screen, seemingly unaffected by his discomfort. With every passing moment, his frustration grew, amplified by the stark contrast between his expectations and the reality unfolding in front of him. He was a man used to getting what he wanted, and this encounter felt like an affront to his carefully curated world. Their surroundings were filled with the low hum of conversation and the occasional chuckle from fellow passengers. Some glanced over curiously, while others simply continued with their own conversations, blissfully unaware of the tension building between James and Lisa. The flight attendant returned, her professional smile still intact, but even she seemed to sense the undercurrent of conflict brewing in the air. As James contemplated making a scene, he couldn't shake the feeling that this situation was about more than just a seat assignment. It was about standards, privilege, and the silent expectations that came with being a first-class traveler. Little did he know this flight would challenge everything he believed. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to leave a comment and stay tuned for the next part of our journey together here on Flourishing Tales. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat, making a deliberate show of adjusting his cufflinks. The woman beside him, Lisa Thompson, remained engrossed in her iPad, her composed demeanor only intensifying his irritation. He couldn't remember the last time someone had so blatantly disregarded his presence. "Excuse me," he said again, this time raising his voice slightly. Sarah, the flight attendant, glanced over with subtle concern. Lisa finally looked up, her gaze direct and unwavering. "Yes." There was no hint of apology or deference in her tone, just a calm acknowledgement that he had spoken. "I believe there might be some confusion with the seating arrangement," James said, his voice carefully modulated to sound reasonable. "Perhaps you could double-check your boarding pass." Lisa held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. "No confusion," she replied simply, then returned to her screen. The brevity of her response felt like a dismissal, and James felt heat rising to his face. He was accustomed to people accommodating him, not dismissing him. Several passengers nearby were now watching with thinly veiled interest, some exchanging knowing glances. When Sarah passed by again, James raised his hand slightly to catch her attention. She approached with a professional smile, though her eyes darted briefly between him and Lisa. "Is there something I can help you with, Mr. Anderson?" she asked. James offered a practiced chuckle, as if sharing an inside joke. "I think there might be a mix-up with the seating. I'm not sure if this lady is in the correct seat." Sarah pulled out her tablet and tapped the screen a few times. "Actually, sir, everything is correct. Your ticket is for 3A and Ms. Thompson is in 3B. Are you certain?" James pressed, his smile tightening at the corners. "Yes, sir. Both seats are properly assigned," Sarah confirmed, her tone remaining professional but firm. James inhaled deeply, pressing his lips together. A businessman across the aisle lowered his newspaper slightly, watching the interaction with undisguised interest. 2 rows ahead, a young woman adjusted her position, her phone angled in a way that suggested she might be recording. Taking another sip of champagne, James considered his options. He could let this go. It was, after all, just a few hours of his life. But something about Lisa's quiet confidence, her complete lack of intimidation in his presence, made that option unpalatable. Perhaps, he said, lowering his voice to what he thought was a discreet level, we could arrange for an alternative seating arrangement. I'd be happy to cover any additional costs. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her posture stiffened slightly. All passengers with first-class tickets are entitled to their assigned seats, Mr. Anderson. There's no reason for anyone to be moved. Lisa hadn't looked up during this exchange, but James noticed a subtle shift in her posture, a slight straightening of her shoulders that suggested she was listening intently. I understand that, James said, his patience wearing thin, but surely there must be some flexibility for long-standing customers like myself. An older woman sitting across the aisle cleared her throat loudly, making no effort to hide her disapproval. A younger man a few seats away shook his head slightly, muttering something to his companion. Sarah's smile had become fixed. I'm afraid I can't accommodate that request, sir. Now, if there's nothing else, I need to finish preparing for takeoff. As she walked away, James felt the weight of several gazes on him. The cabin suddenly seemed smaller, more confining. His usual sense of entitlement was being challenged in a way he hadn't experienced before, and he found himself unsure how to proceed. Lisa continued working on her iPad, her fingers moving efficiently across the screen. She hadn't said a word during the entire exchange, yet somehow her silence felt more powerful than any argument she could have made. James gripped the armrest tightly, his knuckles whitening slightly. The champagne in his glass had lost its appeal, but he drank it anyway, needing something to occupy himself with. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He wasn't accustomed to losing, and he certainly wasn't going to start now, especially not in front of an audience that seemed increasingly invested in the outcome. Wondering what happens next in this tense confrontation? Share your thoughts in the comments below and stay tuned for the next part of this story on Flourishing Tales, where we explore the consequences of entitlement in unexpected places. James Anderson stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, as the minutes ticked by. The woman beside him, Lisa Thompson, continued working on her iPad, seemingly oblivious to his growing frustration. What irked him most wasn't just her presence in first class, it was her complete comfort in this space, as if she belonged here just as much as he did. He had spent years in environments like this, surrounded by CEOs, investment bankers, and old money elites who all carried themselves with the same understanding of their shared privilege. Yet Lisa sat there with an air of quiet confidence that seemed entirely unaffected by his obvious displeasure. A flight attendant passed by, checking seat belts before takeoff. James seized the opportunity, pressing the call button on his armrest. Within moments, Sarah returned, her smile noticeably more reserved than before. Mr. Anderson, is there something else I can help you with? She asked, maintaining her professional tone despite the slight edge that had crept into her voice. James straightened in his seat, adjusting his tie as he lowered his voice to a near whisper. I'd like to request a seat change. Sarah's expression remained carefully neutral. Is there an issue with the seat itself, sir? No, James replied smoothly. I simply prefer to sit elsewhere. Sarah glanced briefly at Lisa, who still hadn't acknowledged the conversation happening beside her. The surrounding passengers, however, were less discreet. A middle-aged woman across the aisle peered over her reading glasses, while a young executive 2 rows ahead had stopped typing on his laptop, clearly listening. After a moment, Sarah consulted her tablet. I'm afraid first class is completely full today, sir. James felt a flicker of disbelief. This had never happened before. He had made special requests countless times and had always been accommodated. Check again, he said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. Sarah's fingers moved across her tablet screen, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson, but there are no available seats in first class. James took a measured breath, determined not to lose his composure. What about business class? Sarah hesitated, clearly weighing how to respond, but after a brief moment she checked her tablet again. There are 2 seats available in business class, she confirmed. James felt a surge of triumph. Perfect, he said, gesturing subtly toward Lisa without looking at her. She can take one of them. The shift in the cabin's atmosphere was immediate and palpable. A collective intake of breath seemed to ripple through the nearby passengers. The executive who had been listening let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. An elderly couple exchanged wide-eyed glances. A college student pulled out her phone, angling it toward them with practiced subtlety. Even Sarah, who had maintained her professional demeanor throughout, couldn't hide her shock. Her posture stiffened, and her eyes widened slightly before she regained control of her expression. Just to be clear, she said slowly, her voice measured but carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. You're asking me to move Ms. Thompson to business class because you don't want to sit next to her. The question hung in the air, stark and uncomfortable. James felt the weight of every word, but he had gone too far to back down now. "Yes," he said simply, meeting Sarah's gaze with what he hoped was unwavering authority. Sarah's nostrils flared slightly as she took a deep breath. "That won't be happening, sir." "Excuse me." James couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. "Miss Thompson has a first-class ticket just like you. She is in her assigned seat. I cannot and will not ask her to move." Sarah's voice was firm, her stance resolute. James felt heat rising in his face. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He was James Anderson. He had status, connections, influence. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I've been a loyal customer for years. I expect a certain level of accommodation." Sarah didn't waver. "We accommodate all our first-class passengers equally, sir." The surrounding passengers were no longer pretending not to watch. Some were openly staring, others whispering behind their hands. The college student was definitely recording now, her phone held at an angle that captured both James and Lisa. James opened his mouth to escalate the situation further, to demand to speak with a supervisor, when something unexpected happened beside him. What will Lisa do next? The tension is building in this confrontation about privilege and respect. Share your predictions in the comments section and subscribe to Flourishing Tales to see how this story unfolds in our next installment. Lisa Thompson, who had remained silent throughout the entire exchange, finally moved. With deliberate calm, she set her iPad down on her lap and reached into her blazer pocket. The movement was unhurried yet purposeful, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. James watched, momentarily confused, as she pulled out a small leather wallet. Without a word, she flipped it open, revealing a gold badge that caught the cabin lights and seemed to illuminate the entire row. The effect was immediate and electric. The badge displayed 3 letters that sent a visible shock through James's body: FBI. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. The college student recording the interaction zoomed in, her eyes wide with disbelief. The executive across the aisle let out a low whistle and shook his head, a smile playing at his lips. An older woman clutched her husband's arm, whispering urgently in his ear. Sarah, the flight attendant, blinked rapidly, her professional mask slipping for the first time as she processed what she was seeing. But it was James who felt the full impact of the revelation. The color drained from his face, his mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Lisa turned to face him directly, her expression calm but her eyes sharp with assessment. "Sir," she said, her voice steady and authoritative, "would you like to file an official complaint? I'd be happy to take your statement right now." The silence that followed was deafening. James's throat constricted. The champagne glass in his hand suddenly felt too heavy. He had spent his entire career wielding power and influence, manipulating situations to his advantage, but in this moment he was completely outmatched. A middle-aged woman sitting behind them couldn't suppress a short, satisfied laugh. "Oh my God," she whispered to her companion, not quietly enough. "This is better than those videos online." The young businessman who had been watching the scene unfold pulled out his own phone, typing rapidly, no doubt sharing the story in real time. The elderly couple exchanged knowing glances, the husband nodding as if witnessing some form of cosmic justice. James struggled to formulate a response, but his mind had gone blank. The reality of what he had done, what he had tried to do, crashed down on him with crushing force. He had assumed authority, had acted on his prejudices, and now, with the entire cabin as witnesses, and at least 2 people recording, he realized there was no recovery from this. Lisa continued to hold his gaze, her badge still visible. "No statement?" she asked after a moment. "Very well." With the same unhurried movements, she closed the badge and tucked it back into her jacket. Then, as if nothing had happened, she picked up her iPad and resumed her work. The dismissal was perhaps the most devastating part. She didn't need to argue or defend herself. She didn't need to make a scene. Her identity, her authority spoke volumes, and now she was simply returning to her business, leaving James to stew in the consequences of his actions. Sarah cleared her throat. "Is there anything else you need, Mr. Anderson?" Her tone had changed completely. There was no warmth now, just professional obligation. James shook his head, unable to trust his voice. His fingers trembled slightly as he set his champagne glass down. The plane began its final preparations for takeoff, but the atmosphere in first class had been irrevocably altered. Whispers continued, phones remained out, eyes darted repeatedly toward James and Lisa. The story was already spreading beyond the confines of the aircraft, taking on a life of its own in the digital world. James's phone vibrated in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out, already dreading what he would find. The screen lit up with notifications, texts, emails, social media alerts. One message from his executive assistant stood out. "James, are you on AA Flight 1142? There's a video going viral." His stomach plummeted. It had already begun. What happens when privilege meets its match? This confrontation shows how quickly the tables can turn. What do you think will happen to James now? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Flourishing Tales for the conclusion of this powerful story. James Anderson sat frozen in his seat, the weight of what had just transpired crushing down on him like a physical force. His entire body felt numb, his mind racing yet somehow blank at the same time. The FBI badge that Lisa Thompson had so calmly displayed still burned in his vision, those 3 golden letters representing everything he had failed to consider when he decided to assert his perceived authority. Around him, the cabin had transformed into an audience, with every nearby passenger now invested in his public downfall. The college student was still recording, her phone angled perfectly to capture his expression of shock and humiliation. The executive across the aisle made no attempt to hide his amusement, occasionally glancing at James with a look that bordered on pity. Even the flight attendants passing by seemed to move more slowly near his row, their eyes flickering toward him with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. James's phone continued to vibrate in his hand, but he couldn't bring himself to look at it again. The single notification he had seen was enough to confirm his worst fears. The incident was already spreading beyond the confines of the aircraft, racing through social media channels with the unstoppable momentum of a scandal in the making. He risked a glance at Lisa, who had returned to her work with remarkable composure. There was no triumph in her demeanor, no gloating, not even acknowledgement that anything significant had occurred. That, perhaps, was the most devastating aspect of all. The complete dismissal, as if he were so inconsequential that even his attempt at humiliating her wasn't worth her continued attention. "Water, sir." Sarah approached with a tray, her voice professionally neutral but her eyes cold. James nodded mutely, accepting the glass with fingers that trembled slightly. He noticed how she placed Lisa's water down with noticeably more care, offering her a genuine smile before moving on. The plane had reached cruising altitude, but James felt as though he was still plummeting. His carefully constructed world of privilege and entitlement was collapsing around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His phone buzzed again, this time with a call. The screen displayed Marsk US CEO, and James felt his stomach twist into an even tighter knot. Marcus was not just his boss but also a close friend who had trusted him with the company's most valuable clients. Now he was calling, undoubtedly having already seen the video that was circulating. James declined the call, unable to face that conversation yet. Almost immediately, a text message appeared, "Call me ASAP. Board members are seeing the video. Damage control needed, Nublu." A woman 2 rows ahead was showing something on her phone to her companion, both of them turning to glance back at James with undisguised interest. The elderly man across the aisle was now on his own phone, speaking quietly but emphatically, his eyes occasionally darting toward James as he apparently described the scene to someone. "I was right there," James overheard him say. The entitlement was unbelievable. "Yes, actual FBI, no, he didn't know." The look on his face, James closed his eyes, wishing he could disappear. Everything he had built, his reputation, his career, his social standing, was evaporating in real time. By the time this plane landed, he might not have a job to return to. The board would distance themselves immediately, clients would withdraw their accounts, colleagues would disavow any close association. When he opened his eyes again, he found Lisa looking at him directly for the first time since she had revealed her badge. There was no anger in her expression, no satisfaction at his distress, just a calm, assessing gaze that somehow made him feel even worse. She didn't need to say anything, her look conveyed it all. "You did this to yourself." She returned to her iPad, and James was left alone with the ruins of his reputation and the crushing realization that the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Have you ever witnessed someone's privilege being challenged? What would you do in Lisa's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to Flourishing Tales for the final part of this compelling story about power, prejudice, and justice. The remainder of the flight passed in excruciating silence for James Anderson. Each minute stretched like an hour as he sat rigidly in his seat, acutely aware of the occasional glances and whispers from surrounding passengers. The luxury of first class, the spacious seating, the premium meal service, the attentive flight attendants. All of it now felt like a mockery of his situation. His phone had become a portal to his unraveling life. The notifications continued to pour in: missed calls from the company's PR team, text messages from board members, emails from journalists requesting comments, and social media alerts showing the video's rapidly increasing view count. One trending hashtag particularly caught his eye: first class be takedown. Sarah approached their row less frequently now, and when she did, her interactions with James were minimal and strictly professional. In contrast, she seemed to take extra care with Lisa, offering her additional amenities and checking on her comfort with genuine warmth. "We'll be landing in approximately 20 minutes, Sarah announced as she collected the empty glasses. She paused, then added with deliberate formality, "Mr. Anderson, the captain has requested that you remain seated until all other passengers have disembarked." James felt his face burn with fresh humiliation. The request could only mean one thing: airport security or airline representatives would be waiting to speak with him. He nodded stiffly, unable to form words. As the plane began its descent, Lisa finally closed her iPad and turned slightly toward him. Her expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes. Not pity, not triumph, but something closer to assessment. "You know," she said quietly, her first words to him since the confrontation. "Most people never see the consequences of their assumptions in real time." James swallowed hard, finding his voice at last. "I didn't." "Yes, you did," Lisa interrupted, her tone matter of fact rather than accusatory. "And that's the problem. You didn't think you needed to consider who I might be before deciding I didn't belong here." The truth of her words hit him with devastating clarity. He had acted on instinct, an instinct cultivated by years of privilege and entitlement, an instinct that had never before been challenged so publicly or so completely. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and the cabin filled with the usual sounds of arrival. The ding of the seatbelt sign turning off, the rustle of passengers gathering belongings, the click of overhead compartments opening. But for James, these familiar sounds now marked the countdown to further humiliation. As promised, when the plane reached the gate and passengers began to stand, Sarah appeared at their row. "Ms. Thompson, you're free to disembark. Mr. Anderson, please remain seated." Lisa gathered her belongings with unhurried efficiency. Before leaving, she paused, meeting James's gaze one final time. "The world is changing, Mr. Anderson. Perhaps it's time you did too." With that, she moved into the aisle and joined the flow of departing passengers. James watched as people filed past him, many openly staring, some shaking their heads, others smirking or whispering to companions. The young woman who had been recording finally lowered her phone as she passed, leaning slightly toward him. "Already at 2 million views," she said, not unkindly but with unmistakable certainty. "Welcome to the internet age." When the cabin was nearly empty, a man in an airline uniform appeared. "Mr. Anderson, I'm the customer relations manager for this terminal. We need to discuss today's incident." James nodded numbly, gathering his belongings. As he stood, his phone buzzed one final time. The message was from the board chairman. "Emergency meeting called for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Your presence is required." Legal team standing by. Stepping into the jetway, James could already see the small crowd of airline officials waiting. Beyond them, through the terminal windows, he glimpsed what appeared to be several reporters with cameras. In just a few hours, his life had completely unraveled. He had spent decades building his power and influence, carefully constructing a world where his word was law and his comfort was paramount. Now, in the span of a single flight, it had all collapsed, not because of some grand conspiracy or catastrophic business failure, but because of his own assumptions and the quiet dignity of a woman who refused to be displaced. As he approached the waiting officials, James realized with stark clarity that this was not just a temporary embarrassment. This was the end of life as he knew it. What consequences should people face for acting on prejudice? Has this story changed how you might view similar situations? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to Flourishing Tales for more stories that challenge our perspectives on power, privilege, and human dignity.